Thank you everyone for joining us tonight. This is the second week on the Liberating Cinema Film Series 2022. We're a charitable organization committed to the representation, restoration, exhibition of world cinema heritage. I would like to thank particularly this year's program the support of the Consortium for the Humanities and the Arts Southeast England, Chase, AHRC UK, the organizational support of Goldsmiths University of London, and all our partners. And particularly tonight, I'm very grateful to thank the National Audiovisual Institute Finland for agreeing to show the film People in the Summer Night by Valentin Vaala, which have been available now to stream through our website and through the Finnish Archives website through our platform during this time and up to this conversation. And I'm very grateful and honored to introduce Jari Sedergren, who's our guest curator and our host and guest of honor for tonight, who will speak to us about Finnish cinema and who will take it from here. Please, Jari, good evening.
Good evening, and nice to meet you and everybody there on the internet. Sorry for my English, I must say, because of the COVID pandemic. I haven't been spoken English a lot in the last few years, but I hope you can understand me. I was starting in the beginning. Finland was one of those parts of the world which started film exhibitions and screenings about the same time as in everywhere else. Before First World War, Finland was the Grand Duchy of Russian Imperium, and film production and distribution rights were largely monopolized by a Swedish-speaking minority, mainly based in Helsinki, the capital here. After gaining the independence in December 1917, a national production company, Suomi-Filmi, later in 1921, Suomi-Filmi was established. And it was the first big company and the biggest for quite a long time. After the Civil War in 1918, national identity wasn't based on film, but mainly of other arts, and it was athletes that give Finland international reputation. Maybe name of the world best long-distance runner, Paavo Nurmi, is known even today. He won, among others, 9 Olympic gold medals. Finnish film was undeniable provincial, especially if you compare it to the golden age of Danish or Swedish film. Few names must be mentioned here anyway. First drama films were directed by Teuvo Puro, who had earlier worked in the National Theatre. The very first film was The Moonshiners, drinking booze, in 1907, which is Spanish. We haven't seen it. Nobody has seen it in our times. And most appreciated film was Sylvi, 1913, was based on a pioneer of Finnish feminist writers, Minna Kant's play from the year 1893. Secondly, the great general director of Suomi-Filmi, Erkki Karu, directed The Village Showmakers in 1923. Like Puro's Sylvi, it was based on play. Finnish national author Alexis Kivi wrote that play in 1864. So you see the first and most important films were based on a literary background, but they were quite old. In Karu's film, 2 recurring themes of Finnish cinema, the forest and alcohol, received their first notable cinematic expression. Finnish films either step back in the past in literary history or set their films to the still timeless milieu of countryside. From the latter grew up truly Finnish genre, lock-roller films. Best example, The Lock-Roller's Pride, 1931, by a new general director of Suomi-Filmi, Risto Orko. Earlier general director Karu had left the company and created a new company called Suomen Filmiteollisuus. If you translate Suomen Filmiteollisuus to English, it's literally Finnish film industry. And then they have these industrial visions. They wanted to be one industry among the others. So they didn't think about artistic or that kind of things at that time. Of course, when they made films, they thought about it, but in general, they thought they were industry. The Rock Roller's Bride, 1931, by Orko, was actually the first big commercial success. But rural love story, The Steward of Siltala, 1934, was the first to get more than 1 million viewers. In other words, about a quarter of a country's population. Rivalry between Orko's Suomi-Filmi and from 1935 on Toivo Särkkä's Suomi-Filmiteollisuus was a fact. Suomi-Filmi introduced wide production of commercial short films, but Suomi-Filmiteollisuus stayed mostly out of short film or documentary production. We didn't have any kind of documentary school at that time. Even we had some quite a good documentary makers. Long documentary started in Finland in 1920s. I've called them nation film because the first film to introduce Finland was more than 100 minutes, and it was shown all over the world, and more than 6 million viewers all over the world in 1923. And that was a film that was shown quite a long time for a Finnish, presenting the Finnish in other parts of the world, all over the world. In 1930s, Suomi-Filmi produced more than 1,000 short films. Third big company, Fennada Film, was created only at the end of 1940s as a result of the merging of two smaller companies. These three concerns were the core of Finnish film production until 1960s. Altogether, there were maybe 15 companies, but most of them lasted only a few years, made 2-3 films, and then they were bought or they bankrupted. In 1944, after the continuation war against Russia, 4 pre-war drama films were banned for more than 40 years. It was because in 1939, when the Winter War broke out, both Orko and Särkkä directed and produced their major spectacles. Both films, Orko's The Activists and Särkkä's The February Manifesto, based on nationalistic view of history with a strong anti-Russian ethos. At the end of 1930s, these films aimed to unite the people against the common enemy from the East. Propagandist portrayal of the Finnish army were directed already in a series of 3 films by Erkki Karu in 1933-34. It presented Finnish army as it was then in the beginning of the 30s. But now, after the continuation of war, these films were banned. Grenadiers' Pride, which depicted Finnish grenadiers joining the German troops in World War I to fight against Russia. The fourth banned film after the Second World War was Kurt Jäger's historical drama about Greater Wrath, in which the Russians occupied Finland, the part of Sweden then, in the beginning of the 18th century. So it was a longer history needed for that. Kurt Jäger was originally German. The core of political censorship of films after the Second World War concentrated on protection of Soviet Union against anti-Russian or anti-Bolshevik sentiments. So my dissertation is about political censorship, and that's why I've been quite interested about these things. During the Second World War, Finnish the mentioned producing companies joined the German idea of blocking the American films from film markets in Europe. This was never fulfilled here because of strong support for American films that were popular among the moviegoers. However, Finnish Film Chamber was divided into 2 groups, German-oriented and American-oriented, and there were hundreds of cinemas, especially at rural areas, where American films were not seen during the wartime. Valentin Vaala, our director today, started his career as film director already in the 1920s and became famous for Suomi-Filmi's new style, where the city portrayed a major attraction. As Peter von Bagh has said, the metropolis lives around the clock, neon lights flash, big band music blares from restaurants, black cars speed through the nocturnal darkness. The sets offer glimpses of precisely the decors and functionalism that will continue to impress admiration even today. The modern era must be invented, they said. Of course, European comedies of manners were an example for Vaala, but today we must emphasize that as a director, Valentin Vaala gave room for female perspective, as he liked to employ women as screenwriters. One of the strongest feminist statements is to be found in Hulda of Juurako, which could have been the film we have shown today. 1937, which was filmed second time in Hollywood with the name Farmer's Daughter. It tells a story about a woman who comes to Helsinki and starts to study, because then there were some first university-like schools where you can really study a high school, get a high schooling, and it was for the women too. Film jury about strong women in Niskavuori is part of the most significant history of Finnish films. Several top directors have taken the task to film about novels of Estonian-born author Hella Vuolijoki. Among urban comedies, Vaala also directed fluently rural drama and melodrama. Vaala is a fine example of Suomi-Filmi's strategy by Risto Orko. He recruited a small crew of top-flight directors and gave them a great creative rein. Part of Orko's strategy was to hire foreign professionals. Albert Rudling came from Sweden, Charlie Boyer and Marius Reich from France. Important was also Orko's part as producer in Suomi-Filmi. He said himself, throughout my entire production period, there wasn't a single script or issue that I didn't go through fairly exhaustively with the director. The same applies most probably to Toivo Särkkä in Suomen-Filmiteollisuus, a company of 240 films in 30 years. Särkkä, originally bank manager, had a fondness for the theater, but anyway, he directed more than 50 films. The Vagabonds Wars is one of the most successful films ever made in Finland. He had his dream team with him, author Mika Valtari, which is maybe well known about Sinuhe, Egyptian story, most popular book in Finland, and most it has sold most in the world, millions, I think. Set designer Hannu Leminen, who became a director himself, cinematographer Felix Forsman, who is very much used also in short films and news reels during the war. And the actors, Tauno Palo, the most handsome man in Finland at that time and most popular, good singer too, Hansa Ikonen and Regina Linnanheimo, Regina Linnanheimo is about Marilyn Monroe of Finland. I won't tell that my daughter's name is Regina. In Särkkä's command, Suomen-Filmiteollisuus was the strongest film company in Finland in 1950s. Especially The Unknown Soldier, 1954, has stayed as a landmark of Finnish film history. Even today, it is shown on TV almost every Independence Day. 6th of December, it was shown once again. After 2000, year 2000, it has been shown every time between 1956 to 2007 times. So look, that's a film. And actually, there's a research on that subject. It tells that where did schoolboys and girls got their information about Second World War? What was the best source for them? They answered it was this film. from 1956. Well, 2054. Oh, who believes that's true if they say so. Okay, today we are looking for the ihmiset suviyössä filmi, People in the Summer Night, which I chose just because I didn't want to go to the normal ones. You know, I like this story, which is a film about a single summer night during which destinies of several individuals are tied up with nature continues its steady cycle. So it's a summer night story. It bases on Franz Emil Sillanpää's novel. Sillanpää was the one who got Nobel Prize of Literature in 1939. Somebody said that Winter War maybe have something to do with it, but anyway, he got this. And his films, his books are filmed several times. People in the Summer Night is also a tribute to the beauty of Finnish rural landscape. Yeah, and that's something I remember Peter von Bagh was complaining, who is a grand historian of Finnish film, now unfortunately died. He said that nowadays Finnish films don't depict nature as it should be. We were laughing because, of course, there were something. I've been thinking about that more and more. And maybe that's one of the reasons why this film is today. It shows how the black and white film can be a nature film too. And there is something in I don't know how many films depict the midsummer party in Finnish film. Maybe 30, 40, maybe even more. They always have the same alcohol, summer night, parties and tiredness and whatever it happens. Franz Emil Sillanpää, the author, said himself that remember that there is only one main character, the summer night. And that was the advice for the filmmakers. Despite minor changes, Vaala's adaptation is faithful to the novel's structure and spirit. That's maybe a good child, and then this maybe not so good. The film tells several intersecting stories about various individuals, and even if single characters are left somewhat hollow due to the nature of narration, what lacks in character development is gained in the completeness of atmosphere, and that's something. It's stylistically is the best Finnish film before 1948, when it was stylistically is absolutely the best. The film is like an instant of eternity, a unique moment brought to a standstill in a timeless state. It has life, death, love, hate, all intersecting in a way that one cannot exist without the other. So it brings together the basic sentiments of the life, and I think you would like it if you haven't seen it yet. The streams of simultaneous events flow with accelerating speed, forming a consistent current of life with Finnish nature constantly vibrating in the background. So that's saga of the Finnish nature and the Finnish people together. It gets it completion in this film. This film shows how filmatic Vaala is at his best, because he made a lot of these comedies where he couldn't make this kind of stylistic impression, but then here he could do something very special. It's a very strong film. The dramatic climaxes in the film are few, but even more effective, and most importantly, his narration is firmly rooted in Finnish nature. That's a good end. And when I was talking about this film, it bases on Sakari Toiviaisen's, which was my colleague earlier in our archive, Finnish film archive at that time, and Markku Varjola's and Peter von Bagh's texts. I think that's enough for this this part of the discussion.
Thank you very much, Jari. That was really, truly wonderful. And a great treasure really to hear about from your experience and immense knowledge about Finnish cinema. In terms of your work, perhaps one of the first questions, and actually before I say that, I should say if anybody does have questions, to please send them to me or to raise your hand. But I would like to ask simply, first of all, you mentioned quite a bit about Vaala. Perhaps you could tell us a little bit about what differentiates, in a way, for those who haven't seen Vaala's films, what differentiates him as a director? What is unique about him a little bit more? And also perhaps to some of his contemporaries like Telva Tullio or later Eric Bomberg or other filmmakers.
Yeah.
What do you think is particularly interesting about Vaala? As you say, is the best film made until 1948. So tell us a little bit more.
First, he used a lot of women text by the women. And he was choosing his actors quite often, finding new actors from the local theaters, and especially in the 1950s, when there were more and more films coming out. During the wartime, of course, they couldn't make that much films. And Vaala was working for the propaganda machinery as well at the beginning of the war, like everybody who could do that. And from 60s on, Vaala was put out of the. He made his last drama film in 1963, and after that he stayed 7 years making short films and winning international prizes for that. But he was very depressed about it. They wanted to kick him out of the company, but Vaala said that if you want to kick me out, send a man who took me in the 1930s, 40 years ago. They sent him to me and to say that I have to go. So he stayed his last years there. All this, Teuvo Tullio is not so well. I don't know how well he is known. He is a melodramatic guy who makes very dramatic melodramas from the beginning. But he was also a satirical person. Sometimes when he exaggerates a lot, he makes in a way that nobody can forget it. Of course, he was with Regina Linnanheimo quite often, who started as from Miss Finland competition in 1930s, and then to films, and then to one of the most admired film star in Finland, and then he put his backs together with Teuvo Tullio, and they made together a lot of films. But Vaala was more that kind of. He was more pragmatic in a way that. One example of that is that he made a couple of his films. He made it twice, and actually, when you see the films, even there is 15-20 years in between them, he used the same camera, same cuts. He didn't change it. He had his style from the beginning to the end, pretty much similar. And that's and you cannot tell if they are. We don't know exactly what he looked. Did he see Swedish films, German films, American films, French films? The French films had a great impact on Finland because two French photographers were working in Finland for quite many years. And so they took this French poetic film style to Finland, but it was maybe more in Särkäs Suomi-Filmiteollisuus productions that used that style. Yes, Vaala made his own style, and he kept it from the beginning to the end. He had a lot of friends who could do something which never been shown in Finnish film before, And like Tullio, he worked with Tullio in the 1920s. Finland is so little country that everybody has worked with everybody at some parts of that. That's even true in 1960s when the division between the new makers and old makers, and that was so big, and the companies were really rivaling together. But actually, if you see the productions through the years, everybody has been working with everybody at some part of the career. It might be a good thing. Maybe it's not so good thing, but nowadays it's completely different. Then okay, if we talk about this international influences, Valentin Vaala was Valentin Ivanov. He was Russian, and his language, original home language, was Russian. And Teuvo Tullio came from Latvia, had some Persian, and many of the film people who worked at Finnish film branch had connections to the world, different parts of the world. Ansa Ikonen, who was mentioned as a woman star, was Russian originally. Finnish Russian, of course, but anyway, language and home was originally there. And from Sweden came money. At the beginning, the whole system was Swedish photographers were the first ones. Swedish, Norwegian companies worked here. Of course, films had to be developed in Denmark and France at the beginning. So this is quite an international branch, as in everywhere. But still, we talk about national film, and if you dig a little bit about it, it's not so national. Vaala is a good example of that he himself had many kind of connections to many other countries, but still he created his own style, which is part of Finnish film history style.
Beautiful, really. And this connections, the international ones that you mentioned and the Russian connection and what you said is really interesting and inspiring to think about. And I think what I would ask you at this point, perhaps it connects nicely to the different things you're saying, and perhaps as an introduction, what would you say is really different? How did Finnish cinema as a studio system perhaps develop? Because you said initially that there was this period where Finland was still part of the Russian Empire, and then Finland, of course, and then this studio system we're talking about now. And then you mentioned also now how the filmmaking works in Finland nowadays. So perhaps you could give us a little bit of perhaps a bigger, if we step back, how it looks like this development from the period in the Russian times to later to now.
Of course, first studios, real studios, with the possibility of coloring the film, were established in the beginning of 1920s when Kurt Jäger, this guy who was independent filmmaker himself from 1925 to 1944, 45, he was establishing the first laboratory for Finnish, which is the basis of any studios, because they had to have their own own laboratory. And of course, it was quite difficult at the end of the 20s because the depression came, and most of the other companies than the big ones could survive. Then in the 1930s, Suomi-Filmi found that it's possible to have a division of these short films, which is 1,000 short films, and it brought a lot of money. And then you needed these big, successful films from 90s, then 1 or 3, which made possible to make these big spectacles, war spectacles, in the end of the 1930s. During the wartime, the state took most of the talents from film industry, but they still continued to make their films. They had problems with the raw film, but we got that from Germany, and since 1943, even from United States, which was not in war with Finland. And that was possible. But anyway, the relation wasn't that good because of the censorship and because of the distribution problems. Britain was completely out of Finnish markets during the wartime because we were at the war since 1941. What studio systems, they kept on till 1964. when everything collapsed. It was basically the question of a strike, because the actors wanted more money of the reproduction, and then they were thinking what to do with the films, and Sedergren sold all of their films to television, which made it possible that television would show Finnish films almost every day. That made it. That wasn't Suomi-Filmi didn't want to do that, but anyway, they couldn't do anything with their own films, old films. So the studio system was based first by the commercial short films, and then by the big single success numbers, like in 1950s, Suomi-Filmi television had this Unknown Soldier film, almost 1 million viewers, which resulted complete overreaction from them. They had to spend all of their money to the new films, which were not so good. And so they started to go down at the same time when the television found its ways to Finnish homes. So it's a good times and bad times story for the small countries' studios that didn't have. We couldn't export films. There were only few films were exported, and I think the money was they didn't get so much money for their films, even if they were distributed to some countries. Of course, Sweden was the best place, and America. There was so much Finnish people living in America at that time.
Thank you. If I may, but perhaps I have one of the last questions. Is there a connection, and this is purely cinematic to think about world cinema, with this idea of people in the summer night, is there whatsoever a connection or inspiration in this Finnish cinema heritage also for Bergman? As you know, he made a lot of films in the summer night and this kind of idea. Do you think it's something cultural, or do you think it's a direct inspiration?
No, I don't think there's that kind of connection. I know that when Bergman started his career in 1944 about making his own films, Heads was the first. There is something similar in a melodramatic way between how is at the first films when how the people meet there, how they hate each other, what kind of feelings and sentiments the people have. That's something which is in common, but it's common to all of the films, melodramas in all of the world. Bergman uses nature more instrumentally. It's not that important. When here it is number one and people are number two. But in Bergman's films, there are always people are number one.
Wonderful discernment. Perhaps to pull out also of our discussion in terms of to contextualize it in terms of the research you do, could you tell us a little bit finally about also your own work and the work of your institute, the National Audiovisual Institute in Finland, and your own research?
My own research, I'm coming to the end of my own research because a few years ago, I started my job was to study film and research film and write books about it. And I had written, my dissertation was about political censorship of films at the university, where I was a university lecturer for quite many years. And then I got this job in Finnish Film Archive. The name was at that time Finnish Film Archive. So I had to find something to do. So I made a deal with the Finnish Board of Classification that they needed their history of film censorship, the 60 years of state-owned film censorship. So I wrote that 600 pages for them, and then after that, actually it was funny that we two institutions came together. So So I was in our little Christmas parties. They couldn't make if I was belonging to them or our group. I said I belong to both of them. No, then about my colleague, there was an older colleague, Ilkka Kippola, with me studying, who was the old head archivist, but now changed. His position was changed to researcher. So he was a specialist of short films and everything that was not the drama or play films, as we called them sometimes at that time. So he started to teach me, and we started our film screenings project, which I think we had 90 screenings altogether, Finnish documentary film from the start to 1990s. And let's say that we have shown most of the Finnish documentary film that is worth of screening. Not everything, but most of it. And at the same time, we started to write presentations for those films. And my job was that when Ilkka showed me some interesting cases, so and there was a VHS cassettes at that time, because there were short films. There were 10 or more short films in the same cassette. So when I was looking for one, I looked them all, and that's how I got to know the corpus of Finnish short films. And we wrote 2 books together of more than 1,000 pages from beginning 1896 to 1989. So almost 100 years of film history, documentaries and short films and every genre what we could find there, and even more, because we took musicals and that kind of, where there were live performances and even advertisements partly. Of course, we couldn't make it with all anthropological films, different kind of company films, news films, anything that's moving on the screen, and that was possible for 2 parts, but we couldn't make a 3rd part because people think that there were much more important things to do than write books. Now I'm waiting for my pension. But then after that, there has been some projects around the film companies. Suomi-Filmi, there was a big book about, we were about 15 writers. Valentin Vaala got his own book. Sakari Toiviainen made several books on Finnish directors. And one book was actually my idea, so I can tell it. It was one film in every year and 100 years of films, which was, I think, is the most selling film book after Peter von Bagh's books that were more popular than anything else in Finnish scene. So the funny thing was at that time when we were making this documentary project, because it was really what an archive can do. You start from the film, what you had in Finland. It is a strange situation. We had all of them. They were in Sweden. They gave it to television, and they used it to cut them to their own programs. But we kept them all. We bought them, and we have bought Suomi-Filmi and Suomi-Filmi Teollisuus. So we have the corpus now, because Suomi-Filmi and Suomi-Filmi Teollisuus, they had bought so many other companies. So buying one, you get 7. That has made it possible to make first these books about these things, but then in the last few years, digitizing these films. And digitizing these films, first the DVD project, and now on the Elonet Finna, which is internet. But I think there are 25 Finnish films with English texts nowadays, and maybe 100 with with Swedish texts. So there a lot of work is going on digitizing area. Then the change happened that this radio and television preservation system was created, which is completely digital. So there are many channels in Finnish public radios that are or private radios that is digitally recorded for our uses, for everybody's uses, because it's a research possibility, then for free. But of course, you cannot record them yourself from our system, but you have to come to our place or some university places to see them. But anyway, it's possible. So I think about 90% of all the radio programs are now possible to hear again. And these systems, meta systems, finding what kind of systems you could have, that is all possible. After we ended our filmography project, which was that every Finnish film that was screened was put into books. But nowadays it's on the net only, and in that way, system is changing. But still, we get all the copies of all the films that are screened, and where you have to where have to pay money to see them. So we get the copy. It's in the in the law, and they have to deposit it to our collection. Of course, it's good for them because they don't have to pay for preserving and keeping it. So this is what we basically what we do. Of course, there are many others because this Finnish film board system was given to us. They merged to our film. So we were first Finnish Film Archive, then we were a National Audiovisual Archive, and now we are National Audiovisual Institute. And that means that we have all this film, television, radio, and media, audiovisual media in our system. So if there are age limits to any films, children's films, so we decide of those things, even if it's privatized in a way, but we are controlling it. And we are controlling of national audiovisual schooling, media schools too. And that's a very lively organization working all over the world nowadays. So they have very good international contacts. And I think they have been doing, I don't know too much, but doing quite a lot of work with games too, internet games. So because age limits for those have sometimes been a problem in every part of the world, actually. But I think the system works now. And there's no banning any films anymore since 2000. But if they are against the law, that means that it's a justice system that is deciding what you can show and what you cannot show. So if you are, no, you can, you know yourself what kind of films should be banned in this world. Snuff, violent porno, animal porno, child porno, everything like this. So we don't give them any bannings, but it's they are sentenced in a juridical system.
Thank you. This is great insight. Perhaps this leads to my final question, and you actually touched upon this very well. And this part about the schooling, I find it particularly very interesting how you do this, and the restoration. What is the kind of work that you think is being done? And this doesn't refer only now to your institute, but also more widely within Finland, but also internationally, perhaps for people who would like to, let's say, discover Finnish cinema. What work is being done to basically rediscover and discover Finnish cinema? You mentioned the work of your colleagues such as Peter von Bagh, and of course your many other great colleagues. But I wonder, what would you say to people who are, interested in discovering Finnish cinema, learning about it, and learning more also about how it works? And this part of education is quite fascinating. So perhaps this is a nice way to bring everything together, if I ask you this.
There is a private company called Koulukino, School Kino, that delivers films to teachers and schools. They have bought some rights for some Finnish films, and they are making this kind of, questions and different kind of programs what the schools and the classes can do with those films. We have our own system, which is called Film Pass, elokuvapolku in Finnish, which is a program for two school levels, the lower years and upper grades. And they both have some film examples, some short texts, some examples, and that can be freely used in every school in Finland. We organize live screenings in film theaters, including, films from 1920s to present day. So we try to be open-minded and try to introduce also that kind of films to the youngsters that are not so interested about them otherwise. So I've read from researchers that, for example, in England, most of the teenagers have never seen a single black and white film. So there's a lot of work to do in that field, but that's also a problem, because one problem is that we sometimes we are not very liberal in our own views of the film or media or whatever. So we are fighting against people who like film in real film, not digital. And people who don't like games, or people who like only games and not the other things, or people who say that I only look for the entertainment, I will never discuss about films, it's just a popcorn, and or people who look only television. There are so many different contradictions in this that if you try to educate people and enlighten people and got some interest about the things you are doing and things you want to present, so there's a lot of work to do.
I think you're right. You said this very nicely, because I think this is the part of both as a critique of how current education currently stands, and then also how we stand in relation to film.
There's a lot of work to to tell the teachers in what way you can use film as a part of your classes, and second thing is also how the children or the youngsters how they get interested about these things, what they are not interested by natural way.
I think it's also important what you're saying, because there is a certain way in which if people are exposed to film, because a lot of younger people and children are exposed to media now, mass media on a very big scale. And then what you're saying, this kind of exposure to particularly, to world cinema, to films, to black and white films, as you said, particularly in a UK context, is important, because then it kind of, I think, opens up the range, and it opens up to people to understand heritage, not only their own, but also other people's heritage, and to see the connections and to appreciate it. I think if this comes quite later on, or if it ever comes, then it will be very difficult for people to engage not only with film, but even the world, perhaps, in some ways. So this is very good.
I was thinking, when the digitalizing started, I thought that it could be a good thing. There were so many good films on the shelves. I was thinking at that time mostly documentaries that were made, nobody uses them, nobody sees them. They're at the production company's shelves or in archive, and there's no way to see them. But if you digitize them and you put them available, it's possible that people see. One thing that taught me that it's possible is the strange thing, the biggest archive in the world, YouTube. The strange thing is that almost every film in YouTube, somebody has seen. So it's not, it's not just an archive without viewers, and that gives me hope in a way, and that's I trust also that nowadays we have got better systems on the internet. We can see old films, we can see strange films, we can see many kind of films, and many, of course, the National Film Archives have done a lot of good job in giving their classics a possibility to be seen on net.
Thank you very much. This is, I think, a wonderful point to, I think, close our conversation, but also open it up for future discussions.
Mm-hmm.
And I think at this point, I would also like for everybody who watches and is watching to basically invite them to see the film People in the Summer Night, which will still be up through our website, and to thank you and also your colleague Tommi Partanen, who worked with us very nicely to put this program together, and to see also the further films and the precious kind of really gems of Finnish cinema and world cinema heritage through your platform, and to discover film anew therein.